think you're good to start whenever you want, Doc.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our first pit for summer quarter. Certainly not the way we thought we were going to start. So we're just going to try to make the best of it online. As soon as we can get back on campus, that's what we're going to do. So what I thought tonight is just to kind of give you a little organizational idea of what PIT's all about, how we go about it when we're actually physically on campus, and then just give you some background of Dr. Gonstead, the Gonstead System, so you understand why we do what we do and why we're excited about it. I don't know if some of you are aware, but there was a huge Gonstead gathering up in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin this past weekend, and 32 of your fellow students went up. So, I wanted to make sure that all of us that did go up to Mount Horeb, that we individually need to send a thank you to Dr. Pam for as much as she supported us financially for a lot of us to go. I can even tell you that she even bailed me out on the auction. She's just awesome. So her desire to help us, there's just no bounds to her desire. And so we need to make sure she knows we appreciate that. So send her an individual thank you if you can, please. And then also, I think we as a group, Gonstead group, that we should, the next time she comes down, or comes up, I should say, to our campus to give us a seminar, that we should present her with some kind of an award or some kind of a recognition, something. We have some time to think about it because we're not on campus right now. But I'm just going to throw that out there, see what you guys think. Okay, so I'm just going to get right to it. What is PIT? PIT comes from a concept that I was exposed to when I was in chiropractic school. There was a doctor named Larry Troxel who had a practice in the city of Davenport, right where Palmer Davenport College is. He actually used to teach on the faculty at Palmer. He taught the Gonstead technique. He did that for about 5 years, and then he eventually pulled away from the university, and in his own practice, he decided to, instead of trying to influence the masses, he wanted to influence a smaller group of students to be the best that they could be. So he developed what he called an intern program, the Troxel Intern program. And it was a series of students taking classes, being interviewed, and then once they passed all the steps that Dr. Troxel felt they needed, he would let them do different activities within his clinic, like take x-rays, shadow him, help develop small seminars or workshops for students on weekends. And anyway, it just ballooned into this huge thing. And when I was in school, on top of you can imagine this now. You know how busy you are in school right now. I don't care what quarter are you in. You think to yourself by week 6 that there's just no way I could ever be busier than I am right now. Is that not true?
Yeah.
Okay, so take that feeling and then add on to the fact that you're a Troxel intern. 2 nights a week, you have to go to his clinic. So your night would like begin at 3:30 in the afternoon when school was over with, if you weren't in clinic anyway. And you'd go out to his office and he'd put you to work till about 10 o'clock that night. Twice a week, you had to do it. And then 8 weekends a year, you helped him put on workshop seminars on the weekends. And then on top of that, you had a Sunday meeting every Sunday night where you did the PIT. So that's where this PIT is coming from, the Troxel Intern program that I went through on Sunday nights. We took turns getting in the middle of a big group of interns, and they would just ask you questions. They would have you try to perform how to do different adjustments on somebody. It was a huge learning experience. And so that's kind of the idea that I'm trying to do with us at Palmer. We don't have an intern program, but you got me wandering around kind of wondering what to do on Thursday nights. So I came up with the idea, why don't we do a Palmer, Florida pit, specializing in focusing on the Gonstead technique. And so far, it's been working out pretty good. We consistently have about, what would you say, 40 or so students, Marcos?
Yeah, at least any given day. I mean, we get certain students that come certain nights, other students that come every night, other nights, but we're pretty consistently at least 40, yeah.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that because I know how busy you are, but I also know how busy I used to be when I was in school. And so, it's whatever you're used to, I guess. Anyway, so this quarter in PIT, I really wanted to make a big focus on instrumentation because it is, Dr. Gonstead felt that was one of the most important things you needed to do to find the subluxation on his patients. And currently on our campus, we only teach chiropractic dual probe instrumentation 1 hour in one class the whole time you're on the Palmer campus. And that to me, that's just inadequate if you want to practice Gonstead. Now, if you're not going to practice Gonstead, then you wouldn't care. But if you're going to practice Gonstead, you need more than 1 day just looking at it and saying, oh, yeah, okay, I'll think about it. So we're going to go, one of the PowerPoints I'm going to do after I give you a little bit of the history of the Gonstead system is a short PowerPoint on what instrumentation is in a little more detail and the science behind it and why it's important. Because, why would you want to do it unless there was some value to it, right? That's just one more thing to do that you don't have time for. So we don't do anything in the Gonstead system that doesn't help us be more accurate, be more specific on what we're trying to do. And instrumentation is actually where you start in the Gonstead system. Anybody have any questions on that before I put up that first PowerPoint?
I think we're all set, Doc.
Okay. So in PIT, when we get back in class, I might give you a short half-hour instruction on something, but then we'll get right to the hands-on. Typically, we have quarters 1 through 5 spend most of the first half of our 3 hours with me. And then while I'm working with 5th quarter and under, the upper quarters are doing a task for me that I've asked them to do. And then the last half of PIT, when we come together, we'll make a big circle, and those upper quarter students, 6 through 13, if they're on campus, we're going to put them one at a time in the pit, and we're just going to ask them questions and have them demonstrate. And it's a great learning experience to watch somebody else do something, and you're trying to see if you understand, number one, understand what they're doing, and number two, do you see something that could be done better? All right, so let me see if I can get this up. So I'm going to hit present now first, right, Marcos?
Yes.
All right.
And then the entire screen, and then the big screen. Okay, we see your screen now.
Okay, let me go get my PowerPoint. Do you see it?
Yes, sir.
All right, and you can hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right, so here's a picture with a spine on the right, and is that the Leaning Tower of Pisa on the left? Is that what we correctly call it? I use this to give you an example of what is the Gonza system about? Well, it's about the foundation. So if the foundation of a building is off just a little bit at the bottom, it's going to affect the rest of the building or the structure all the way up to the top. But notice how the amount of deviation, if it's not level, increases the further up you go. Well, the same would be true with the spine. And so the Gonstead system is based on a level horizon or table, so to speak. There's Dr. Gonstead. born in 1898, died in 1978. So I never got to meet Dr. Gonstead. I graduated from high school in 1975. Dr. Gonstead is famous for saying this, and I've used this a lot in my classes. Those of you that remember philosophy, you know I've used this phrase. Remember that chiropractic always works. Now that's, in and of itself, is sometimes for some people is hard to grasp, right? That a chiropractic always works. Well, the only way it's going to always work is if we always do the right thing. So he goes on to say, when it does not seem to, examine your application. And what does he mean by that? Well, we do a lot of things in the Gonstead system to figure out where we're going to adjust and how we're going to adjust it. So we're always examining our motion palpation, our static palpation, our visualization, looking at the films, our instrumentation, all that, putting it together. We're examining the idea, am I on the right bone? Do I have the right listing? Maybe this patient would do better on a different table. We have all kinds of tables. We have all kinds of alternative contacts. So the Gonstead system is quite a complete system. But in the end, he says, but after you examine your application, do not question the principle of chiropractic. A little bit about Dr. Gonstead himself, what makes him special. As a lot of us that became doctors of chiropractic, he had a medical issue. And his particular main issue was that he had rheumatoid arthritis, and the medical doctors didn't do a very good job with helping him with it. And a doctor by the name of J.B. Olson, who his mother took him to, helped his rheumatoid arthritis go into remission. He actually had 2 bad bouts of it, one as a younger child and one as a young adult. He's a 1923 Palmer graduate. This class is considered the Crusader class because over 500 DCs from that class were jailed. And so probably what that means is they were jailed multiple times. However, I've never ever heard that Dr. Gonstead was ever jailed. He was so famous and so good at what he did, I don't think the authorities would have even wanted to deal with that at all, as much as he was loved in the area that he practiced. Dr. Gonstead was a workaholic. He did not have any kids. He was married. Elvira is his wife's name. He practiced 7 days a week when he was in his prime, but his days were not a normal day. His days were 8 in the morning till 2 in the morning the following day. And he did that 6 days a week. And then he also worked on Sundays from 8 to 1. So he was seeing an estimated 250 patients a day. And if you do the math, that's about 4 million patient visits in a lifetime. So it does give him a little bit of credibility on some of the things that he learned through private practice, both clinically. Now, what we teach you clinically in the Gonstead system doesn't always match exactly what you are taught in school in anatomy and physiology, because clinical science is a lot different than anatomical physiological science. So just be aware of that. He actually practiced in 3 different locations in the Mount Horeb area. I'll show you some pictures of that. Where is Mount Horeb? Mount Horeb is, what would you say, guys, about 30 miles west of Madison?
About. Pretty close.
Yeah. And, it's not a big town. And so, we're talking, 3,000 people now? And it would have been a lot less back then. So in order to see 250 people a day, he's got to have people coming in from all over the country. His first office was in a bank building there in Mount Horeb, 1924. And then his second office, you see here, a nice office is about 5,000 square feet. All of us would be happy to have a clinic this nice, right? Like most of us would say, okay, we're done. We're going to retire in that kind of a clinic, a nice 5,000 square foot clinic. Dr. Gonstead had to go bigger. And those of us that were up here this weekend, some of them had been there before, but a lot of them, it was their first time there. Can you guys see my pointer?
Yes.
Okay, so this front building is the clinic. So this whole front area that looks like a big wing, butterfly wing, that's the waiting room. And then all the rest of these rooms are treatment rooms. There's a garage in the back, and then there's a full basement underneath all of this for seminars. Oh, and then getting back to his workday, he also did seminars on top of seeing patients like that. Now the rest of this is all hotel, the Chiropractic Inn. So he was so busy that he had to accommodate people staying for a week at a time, month at a time for their care, because they came from all over the country, some from all over the world. He had an airstrip on his personal property, I believe, that people could fly in with small planes once they got into Madison. How big do you think this building is? The clinic, just the clinic itself, not the hotel.
Maybe about 22,000 square feet.
29,000 square feet. I think the new building we're building on the Palmer, Florida campus is, I think it's around 31,000 square feet. So one man did this. One guy did this one visit at a time. And these were not $50 visits. And this is without insurance. He did this with $3, $5, $10 cash on the barrel visits. If anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to just stop me. Just unmute yourself and go ahead and fire away. All right, so what is this cool thing Dr. Gonstead was doing in that building for 50 years? Well, he developed the system. Remember, he graduated in 1923, so that would have been when B.J. Palmer was at his height, and it was all upper cervical. You know, anything below upper cervical was a waste of time, according to B.J. So, that's another discussion in and of itself, but that is the environment that Dr. Gonstead graduated from. So it didn't take him long to be in practice to find out that wasn't going to cut it. That wasn't going to help as many people as he thought should be helped with chiropractic care. Because remember, it's always don't question it, but examine your application. So that's what he did. And so he came up with a system of how to process a patient to find out what's wrong with them and how chiropractic might help them. So this chart on the right is kind of a fun way to look at the process, but if that's too busy to look at, then just look at the spoked wheel here that I have here at the top. So taking a good patient case history is number one, but that's not just on the first visit. That's every visit after that as well. The history gets shorter, of course, with ongoing visits, but you're still finding out verbally what's going on in that patient's life. Visualization. What's visualization? It's a combination of looking at posture. It's a combination of looking at posture and body movement with gait, head carriage, shoulder carriage, foot flare, length of stride, how one strides, how do muscle areas look around the spine. Are they peaked? Are they flat? And on we can go with visualization. And then there you see instrumentation, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about tonight. Just crucial to the Gonstead system. This is pretty much where you start, actually. After the patient history, most of us would go right to sitting the patient down and running our instrument on them to figure out what's happening in their spine. Sometimes doctors like to link or put together both static and motion palpation together. It certainly is a mix. You're doing them almost simultaneously, but static palpation will tell you something different than motion palpation. Static palpation, we're looking for and trying to feel edema, color changes, muscles that are flaccid or muscles that are spasmed, that type of thing. Motion palpation, we're actually trying to isolate a vertebral segment on how it motions. because that lack of motion, we have to make sense of that, because we have to figure out, based on the lack of motion, how we're going to deliver an adjustment with the correct line of correction. And then X-ray at the end to help tie it all together. So we don't do anything in the Gonstead system by itself. We would never adjust a patient straight off an X-ray. We would never adjust a patient straight off of motion palpation or static palpation alone. We would never just use an instrument on the patient and nothing else. And we would never just visualize only a patient before adjusting. We would do it all. And then if we're on the right track of what we need to find, there should be a minimum of 3 to 4 of these 5 indicators to tell us what to do. There aren't any other techniques that, as far as I know, that do that. Maybe I'm wrong. If you know of another technique that has more indicators or objective attempts to decide what to do for that patient, let me know. But as far as I know, nobody does all of this. There are techniques that do a couple of them. There are techniques that only just do one of them. There are some techniques that don't even do any of them. They just throw people on the table, look at a short leg, and they crunch everything from the bottom to the top. So that's not conscientious, good chiropractic care if that's what they're doing. Anybody have any questions on the Gonstead approach to the Gonstead system? Hi. Go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Meisel, it's Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
How you doing?
I am great.
So I had a question that goes a little bit back towards the history of Gonstead. So,
okay. You want me to back up?
If he graduated, learning under BJ, hole-in-one, completely upper cervical, how did he go about developing his system of adjusting? Like, where did he get side posture from, for example, the knee chest table? I know he developed pulls much later after perfecting pushes, but how did he go from completely upper cervical to learning how to side posture like the best of them?
Yeah, I think trial and error. I've seen video of him telling a group of people, he understood some of their growing pains, but he said he had to do that all himself as well. Even though BJ Palmer was pushing the upper cervical technique, during Dee Dee's time, before BJ took over, they were doing full spine adjustments. They were pretty crude, but I'm assuming he got exposed to some of that.
Would you say that he, like the side posture position, for example, he kind of developed that on his own, or did he get some of that from things as early as AT Still, for example?
That's a good question, and I'm not going to BS you. I don't know the answer to that question. Let's say you'd have to ask a Gonstead doctor that was older than me. How's that?
All right, Doc. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something we should maybe check into. That's a really good question. I might know some guys that might know the answer to that, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Sounds good. Thanks, Doc.
Yep, good question. Thanks. Anybody else?
Dr. Meisel, how did he go about documenting all these patient and the symptom kind of correlations and stuff like that? Do they have any records of that?
I'm sure there are. Well, the chapters are part of it. I'm sure whether there's any patient records anymore, I don't know. That would be something we could ask the Gonstead Research Society or the Gonstead Clinical Studies Society. They might have a better idea of that than I would.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. We remember when Dr. Burns spoke this weekend, and he said that teaching seminars and doctors, we were an inconvenience to him. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was too busy treating patients, to be able to do studies like, we're trying to do in modern times, a guy like Gonstead, he was like a Rembrandt, he didn't have time. He was too busy treating people. So, he was keeping track of stuff, I'm sure, in his own personal notes of trends, the things that he was finding, and then putting it together based on what he knew about the nervous system. You guys got some really good historical questions. Sorry I don't have the answer.
Doc, I'm trying to still get that speech. Dr. Lawler said that he's going to send it to me soon once they get it done.
Oh, Dr. Burns?
Yes, if you wanted to have that for future.
Yeah, I would love to show that to my first quarter philosophy class. Oh my goodness. Did that give you goosebumps or what?
Yeah, I mean,
speech.
I don't know how people are amazing.
And it wasn't longer than 20, 30 minutes, but boy, what a speech.
Oh yeah. Definitely wasn't faked, that's for sure, which you see.
No, and the neat thing about Dr. Burns is, he lived it. He's not just somebody just talking and not knowing what he's talking about. He lived all that, still living it all.
It's the only thing that keeps him going, I feel like.
Yeah.
Chiropractic right there.
All right, let's move on a little bit. So another part of the Gonstead system, the Gonstead way of doing things beyond level plane or level foundation is the disc plane theory. Dr. Gonstead felt that at least from C2 to L5, S1, the cause of a subluxation was happening at the disc. And it was the disc that we should look at to help us to decide how we're going to approach adjusting any particular vertebrae. The atlas and occiput's a different animal. And then the atlas to the axis, as well as the SI joints. That's all different structures, but it's the disc below C2 all the way down to L5, S1. Now, normally the disc should be parallel in both the A to P and lateral view. The center is the nucleus. It's made up of some pulpy material, and then it's held together in the middle by these tough annular fibers, but yet it's movable. And so, if you bend one way or the other, the disc will wedge. And then you move the other way and it'll wedge the other way. And that would be normal function. But when a disc gets wedged and then it gets stuck, that's creating an abnormal function at that segmental level. And that is where we're going to find nerve root or root, depending upon where you're from, right? Irritation. So that nucleus pulposus, that's the atlas, so to speak, Charles Atlas holding up the two vertebrae apart from each other. And then when we get damage to that disc, that's going to create misalignment of the vertebrae sitting on the disc. And you can see here are some cadaver discs of a dog showing you how the fibers can tear and how the pulpy nucleus can be spread out within the disc. So just here's another example of showing you how the disc might disc wedge, both in the A to P and the lateral and the S to I. So in the disc plane theory, Dr. Gonstead is saying that the subluxation from C2 to L5, S1 is caused at the disc. And the first direction of misalignment that you'll be get taught in school is posterior and inferior. Why is it posterior and inferior? Because that's the angle of the facet. So the first direction of correction has to be posterior to anterior. And what's sitting at the disc level? The the spinal nerve root has to pass through there. So that is where we're looking for subluxation with our instrumentation. And oh, that sounds so easy. But it's not that easy, because within these intersegmental points between one vertebrae and the other, depending upon what the overall curve looks like, where that disc space is may not always be in the same place from person to person. Like, say, for example, with my arrow here, let's say right here is where you're going to get your instrument reading. That's where the subluxation is. So you would think, okay, that should be easy. I should be able to find my reading right here. And on this patient, that's where it's at. But maybe on another patient, that reading is coming up higher on that spinous process because of the curve. So that's why looking at a film and knowing your landmarks on the patient with visualization is going to help you with your instrumentation. It's all interrelated, all interrelated. So here's an example of a dual probe instrument. They have lots of names. Nervoscope by, Neurocolometer was the first one by BJ, and then they were called nervoscopes. Then the FDA didn't like that because it doesn't measure nerves in their opinion, so they had to change the name to Temposcope, and there may be some other names out there. The reason it's dual probe is because you're comparing the temperature from one side to the other. You're also doing more than trying to find the temperature. You're trying to find nerve irritation, nerve inflammation, and that looks totally different on the scope on how you're going to look at it and read it. How long do you think it should take to full spine scope a patient? When you're a student first learning, maybe half an hour. When you're in a busy practice and you've got your procedure down, 2 to 3 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes, maybe quicker than that once you have worked with the patient for a while. So don't let anybody tell you that doing an instrument will slow you down. Dr. Gonstead saw 250 people a day. I was happy to see 250 to 275 people a week. So I had plenty of time with my patients to scope. So we're not just trying to find heat. We're trying to find an electrochemical response. Dr. Gonstead called it nerve pressure. The instrument on the right that you see there, that black box, that's called the Delta T. I've got 2 of them. They're both over 35 years old, or right about 35 years old. And, they're a little beat up, but they still work. So it's, it was probably the best chiropractic equipment money that I've ever spent. The worst thing that can happen to them is dropping them. That's about the worst thing that can happen. If you don't drop them, they'll last forever. This particular scope has a nice Teflon tip on it. It glides really nice. There's a new trend in instrumentation coming out that we were exposed to at the extravaganza that's should make it easier for us to identify this thing that we call the break, and that's what you're seeing here. So if there is actually a true subluxation from a Gonstead system point of view, we should, as we scope our patient, we should see a specific horizontal break, we call it a break, that peaks and then quickly recedes. And they come in all shapes and sizes, and that's the hard part to find it. That's one of the problems you have in learning how to use the instrument, is learning how the difference between what we call a heat swing and a break. So where it says recession here, that would be a heat swing to the left. This quick deflection, and believe me, they're never this easy to see. This is for presentation purposes only, just so you can see what we're talking about in a quick way. They don't look this big and this obvious. They just don't. But that's similar to what you're looking for on a smaller scale. Anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, Macy had a question. She said, Dr. Meisel, what's a good way to explain in a few sentences how the scope works when people say it just measures heat and doesn't tell you anything about a subluxation?
Okay. Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit. But for right off the top of my head, I would just say, well, have you asked the person, have you ever used the scope? How much have you used it? And if they say, wow, 1 hour, then they don't know what they're talking about. So then you say, well, let me show you. Then you're just going to have to say, let me show you, because there's a difference between a heat swing and there's a difference between the break. And the break never goes away. If it's a true subluxation, it won't go away until you fix it. And it doesn't look anything like a heat swing. So what is the heat swing and what is the break? They're two different phenomena happening at the same time.
And didn't Dr. Gonstead show this in one of his seminars by smacking the back of one of the students that asked something like this?
Oh, yeah.
And said, go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He found a break, and then they said, well, can't you just rub that away? And he said, I'll show you rub it away. And he slapped the guy pretty good a bunch of times, and then got his back nice and red, all heated up, and scoped him again. There it was, still there. So I guess, if somebody wants to have an example done to them, you could do that to them and say, well, let me show you. Did that answer your question, Macy?
She said, yes, thank you.
I mean, remember, the instrument, we look at it as very important, but again, it's not the only thing we're going to do to figure out what to adjust. It's a piece of the objective puzzle, so to speak. We're always talking about evidence-based. Well, we're trying to develop evidence as to why T7 should be adjusted and not T3 or any other segment. Why it should be the atlas and not the left ilium, or maybe it needs to be both of them. In other words, you have to have evidence as to why you're going to do what you're going to do. So in chapter 11 in the Gonstead chapters, that's where this image is taken from, and these diagrams. So there's on the left, there's a picture of Dr. Gonstead standing from the side running his scope. I don't know how often he did it this way. I think mainly he did it this way for this picture just to show the scope. I don't think he actually did it this way standing from the side on a regular basis. I don't know that for sure, but I got a pretty good idea that he was behind the patient when he did that. He wasn't standing to the side. In this first image on the left, you see the spine there, and then you see this squiggly line that kind of meanders left and right. So imagine that you have your scope, like you see here on the left, on the patient. So there's a left and a right probe, and you're running that down the spine. And as you're running it down the spine, you're watching the needle on that scope drift from left to right all the way down. So if you see these smooth or soft bends in how the needle is going, that's heat swings. That's what we call a heat swing. That's not a subluxation. Then if you look in the middle diagram, we're showing you at T2, T6, T10, and L1 a couple different images of how a break might look on the scope as you're running by the patient. So above T2, the T2 disc, you see that is more of a slow meandering line of the needle moving around. Then all of a sudden at T2, a quick deflection with a sharp point, and then it breaking back to the left. That is what we're looking for. Typically, we say that the open wedge of that motor unit, of that disc between T2 and T3 then, would be where the potential subluxation is because of that particular movement of the needle. And then after that segmental level, look what happens. It goes back to just that smooth heat swing, meandering around. Then all of a sudden at T6 here, you see another big horizontal deflection with a peak, and then it recedes back into this meandering needle flow. And then look at this. The heat swing goes left, but the break goes right, and then it goes back to the heat swing on the left. And typically the peak of the break points to the side of the open wedge. So that's showing you that, let's say, for example, T10, the open wedge is on the right. Even though the heat swing went left, if it's subluxated, the heat swing, the quick break is going to go to the side of the open wedge. That's most of the time. Most of the time. But are you going to rely on that totally? No, you're going to use your palpation to verify there's a wedge on that side. You're going to use your x-ray to verify that you have the wedge on that side. Everything has to point to that side before you really want to accept it as true. So look at this one. This one is showing a big heat swing and then not really a sharp break. And look, it's not going on the side of the open wedge. So this is probably more of a chronic. Even though the wedge is on the left, it's hotter on the closed side of the wedge because this is probably a chronic problem. And you know, when you're scoping, you don't have to decide on if something's chronic or acute. You know, really, for me in practice, I just got to find the right one first. I'm not even going to worry about what the listing is or which side the brake is on. I just need to find it. I need to be confident in that it's the one that I think it is. So don't get caught up in argument with anybody. Is it on the side of the open wedge or not? I don't want to say I don't care, but I also don't want to say you can't, lose sleep over it. You're just looking for what level is this electrochemical phenomenon happening at. And then there's this rare condition that I maybe saw twice in my 31 years of practice. Gonstead must have saw it a whole lot more just because of the volume of patients that he treated. But you can get what we call cord pressure in the upper cervical region that can affect vasomotor readings on that scope, and so it will shift to one side or the other and just stay that way possibly the whole length of the spine, or it wouldn't have to go the whole length, but it could go halfway down. So whenever you see something like that, in fact, when I first saw that, I thought, my battery on my scope died, and it wasn't my battery. It was actually cord pressure.
Hey Doc, we got a couple questions from the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
The first one says, "Hi Doc, does the break on the delta T also indicate the disc is open wedge on that side?"
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're using a delta T or a Go scope or Temposcope. It's all picking up the same thing. There's just some different, if I understand your question right, there's just different technology on how the scope is put together. Did that answer the question?
The next question was, I'm not sure, he hasn't typed in.
Okay.
He says, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Next question was, what does the heat swing tell us? Does it mean anything?
The heat swing is telling you that the muscles are irritated. The soft tissue is irritated, quite possibly, depending upon how big of a heat swing you see. Now, if you see short heat swings that, are pretty close to the spinous process or not further out than at least the transverse processes, that could just be normal overuse, or somebody who just got done exercising or something like that. But like I say, it doesn't matter. The heat swings don't matter. It's the breaks you're looking for. They don't go away.
Yeah, Doc, I also heard a few docs sometimes do their first run through with the scopes, and that kind of will tell them like the patient's overall like pattern if they are paying attention to that. I don't know if you've...
Yeah, so it gets to the idea that if you think you see something that looks suspicious, you got to go over it a minimum of 3 times. So there are some times where I didn't even look at my scope, or hardly looked at my scope, other than to make sure my probes were on the skin correctly. Didn't even look at the needle because I just wanted to get that surface temperature under control. Kind of just get the track open to read it. So you have to do it. If you think you have a subluxation at the atlas, you want to be scoping it 3-4 times. Make sure you truly see what you think you're seeing. Anybody else?
I think that's it so far, Doc.
Okay. Good questions. There's also additional instrumentation that you can use in your practice. There is a single probe instrument. I use the single probe a little bit with extremities, not so much with spine or nerve tracing, but I did use it with extremities. When you find a bad joint, it'll make the patient jump. It's kind of fun to do, as long as you don't turn it up too high. There's also surface EMG. I use some of that. That's not going to tell you where to adjust, but it's a great teaching tool that you could use as like initial exam, follow-up exam, and then if the patient's ever released, like with auto or workman's comp, you have these patterns of muscle activity. Red being, hot and inflamed with a lot of contraction activity. Then, of course, the green would be more normal tone. So if a patient first came in and they were, 95% red on one side or one region than the other, then over time you have subsequent objective evidence showing the progress of the patient. There's also pattern analysis. This is more, used with upper cervical technique, determining whether somebody is in pattern or out of pattern. I don't know a lot of Gonstead doctors that would use this. I know a lot of them that use the surface EMG, and there is an instrument called the Titron as well. Does the Titron run on a pattern analysis, you guys that know?
Yes, it has an option for it.
That's right. It has an option for it. So you don't have to rely on just the dual probe. The dual probe you would use on visit to visit. Stuff like this you would use more on an intermittent basis. And the single probe you use more with when you just are not sure about what the patient needs. This will help you isolate the spot. Dr. Denny O'Hara is a master at the single probe. So if he ever teaches single probe instrumentation at any Gonstead seminar, you want to make sure you jump in and watch that. So some of our diagnostic procedures, again, static emotion palpation, visualization. We have to touch the skin. We have to look at the skin. We can't be doing this through t-shirts and sweatshirts. We're spending a lot of time looking at posture. Certainly can do orthopedic neurological tests for sure. However, quite frankly, that's not going to help you find the subluxation. That's going to just irritate the problem so that you can prove to an insurance company, yeah, there's a problem there. But it doesn't tell you what you need to do. So don't think when you go through school that orthopedic tests are going to tell you what to do with the patient. In fact, I'll just let some of the upper quarter students tell you what they think of that. That's just my personal opinion. What do you guys think that are in the upper quarters?
It just seems like a lot less specific way and a more painful way for us to find out what the problem is. I mean, the patient is in a lot, they feel worse when you're done with them. And then to tell you an ileum is a problem when we can figure that out with our analysis without putting the patient in more pain than they're in.
Right. And that's the last thing the patient wants you to do when they come in there to see you, is for you to make them more sore.
Yeah. And Doc, Kay asked, is the single probe used on full spine or only upper cervicals?
Mainly extremities. You can use it for nerve tracing if you want. It's where you would start at a particular segmental level and then see if you could trace it out over the skin into the extremity. Or you can just use it to try to see if you can find where this, let's say for example, a patient has a knee problem and it's medial knee pain, and you want to know exactly where on that medial joint space where it is the swelling the worst. You could isolate it with that single probe instrument.
And Megan said about orthopedic tests that she thinks it's a good way to chase pain and not focus on the root of the problem.
Very interesting thought on that. Yep.
Because I actually had that happen with one of my patients yesterday in clinic. She had a positive cervical compression at like the C2 area, and that's where the pain was caused, but we found that it was a T3 problem rather than just all the way up there. So
yep,
you can definitely see where we chase pain on those.
Yep.
And then Hanging with Coop said, how is the pattern of muscle irritation different from a heat swing versus muscle irritation from a break of a true subluxation?
Say that one more time.
Okay.
That's a pretty complicated question, it sounds like.
So how is the pattern of muscle irritation different from a heat swing versus muscle irritation from a break of a true subluxation?
Okay, so if I understand your question right, I think you're mixing it up just a little bit. So a break is never a heat swing, and a break never has anything to do with the muscle. A break is nerve irritation at the disc. All the other movement of the needle is related to the heat swing of the soft tissue being inflamed. Did I answer that the way you thought you had the question framed?
Waiting on him to answer that. But,
yeah.
And Macy said headaches went away after upper thoracic adjustments, not chasing pain, pretty much, of suboccipital pain. And then Coop said, I thought you said a heat swing was muscle irritation.
Yes, I did. But a break is not. A break is nerve irritation. So you can find a break within the middle of a heat swing, because those muscles overlie the spine. So there is a differentiation between the two. Did that make sense, or is he still not sure?
He says, okay, thank you.
Okay, and if you don't really understand my answer, I'd be more than happy just to sit down with you sometime, and either over the phone or whenever we get face to face again, and just talk about it, because maybe I didn't totally understand what you were asking me. Here's the Gonstead equipment that's available to you that will help you fix anything that walks in your door. You just have to get it fitted to your size. So, if you're a small stature, you can get everything a certain height made, almost everything. The knee chest is pretty much the same. They can't get it much shorter than because it's on the floor. But the height of your pelvic bench, you do a lot of low back work here, side posture, push and pull. The knee chest, you can adjust everything from the coccyx to the occiput on this table. You've seen videos of BJ Palmer doing toggle recoil on the full spine on a not this kind of knee chest, but it was a variation of the knee chest. So, like, getting back to your question about Dr. Gonstead and like the pelvic bench and so forth. Well, we know the knee chest was around in BJ's time. So I think what Gonstead did was he probably took the equipment that was available that they were using full spine in DD's time, and then he just tried to have it perfected better. So those are your three basic pieces of equipment. Dr. Gonstead always told patients when he would refer them or say, okay, go home, and the doctor, he tried to refer them to another Gonstead doctor in his later years, and he would always tell his patients that if you walk into the treatment room and you don't see that knee chest out front and center, get out of there, because they're not really doing Gonstead, because a true Gonstead doctor, they're using that table. They're not laying equipment on top of it like clothes or boxes. They're actually using it. In Gonstead System, we can also use a high-low, very effective with the elderly. And then the most recent table in the last 15 or so years has been this table that looks like a pelvic bench, but it's not. It's wider on one end than it is the other, and the slot piece goes at least 2/3 of the way. So this would be a way of adjusting anything prone without being afraid of having to break ribs or sprain ribs. You never want to adjust anybody prone on the pelvic bench. That's how you break ribs. But you could do it on a slot table, because the spine would then fit right into this slot, so it has room for things to move. Where do you get this equipment? The website is chirosets.com. The company was originally run by a gentleman named Richelieu, was his name. I think he's now passed away, but his company is still there. I think it's being run by the family. And everything that's made here is of high quality and to the specs of Dr. Gonstead. So what are some of the contributions to the profession? Dr. Gonstead provided a full spine chiropractic system with reproducible results. See, that's the whole thing, right? It doesn't matter what anybody does out in the field unless it can be reproducible. Then that gives it more validity. The level disc theory, the foundation principle, and spinal biomechanics. Boy, that's huge in the Gonstead system. Full spine radiographs, full spine biomechanical analysis of those radiographs, and a listing system. So what I mean by listing system is you're going to learn in your care classes how to describe with letters the position of how a vertebrae is sitting in the body when it's compared from one vertebra to the next. So if I would say to an upper quarter student, ASRP Atlas, they know exactly how they would, in a general sense, set up for that adjustment. It wouldn't be the same for everybody with the same listing, but they would, in a general way, know exactly what to do because of that specific spinal listing nomenclature. So Dr. Gonstead was so busy and so successful with his full spine system that the profession was actually thinning out in numbers quite a bit in the schools because they were just sticking to that upper cervical work, and BJ Palmer allowed the Gonstead system into the school, and enrollment exploded. Marcos challenged a lot of you this past break to read the chapters cover to cover. How many of you did it?
We had a pretty decent showing, actually. It was a lot of people from our school, from other schools, and even doctors. Dr. Danny Lees, Dr. Brittany Cedar, they did it too. Dr. Robert White did it and Dr. Robert White, actually, if anyone wants to check him out on Instagram, every single day he gave about 5 to 10 points of what he learned that day by reading these chapters. So
yeah, he's awesome. By the way, when he was a student at Palmer, he didn't start really looking into the Gonstead way of doing things until 7th quarter. But boy, when he went in full bore, and he actually graduated with the Clinical Excellence Award. So we're pretty proud of him for that. And also, he's only been in practice, has it been 2 years yet, Marcos?
not yet. He's almost getting close.
He's getting close, right? So I don't know how many people he sponsored to go up to Mount Horeb this past weekend, but I know it was several. And it's like, he is just an incredible person, and he's dedicated to the Gonstead work, and he's another person we should send a huge thank you to. Lots of continuing education seminars you need to go to if you want to be good at the Gonstead system. Anything worth doing is not easy. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And the number of students that use the Gonstead system the way we teach it, today, the percent of students that do it has not changed since I was in school. So you will definitely, for example, if we say that we have 840 students on our campus, and 40 of the 840 show up regularly, and they're the same students to Pitt, that's about right. That's about 1%? Or less. So that used to bother me. And then I realized that, not everybody wants to be dedicated as much to something as we are in the Gonstead system. So you're with a unique family of men and women who want to be as good as they can, and they realize it's a lifetime of learning, and aren't scared or shied away from that. So you're always going to seminars to make yourself better. And I think everybody that went up to Mount Horeb discovered that we have an extensive system of doctor mentoring. There's no way I could have had the practice that I did and the results I got in my practice had I not studied and mentored under Dr. Troxel. And he had a mentor. Lucky for him and Dr. Wood, they had actually had Dr. Gonstead himself. But very important to have a mentor in the Gonstead system. And I don't know any Gonstead doctor in their field who won't go out of their way to help you as long as they know you want to learn from them. Lots of good patient care protocols and case management in our Gonstead system. What I mean by that is understanding sympathetic and parasympathetic in the patient with your patient care. There's all kinds of Gonstead organizations you can get involved with. GAT is Gonstead Advanced Technique. GMI is Gonstead Methodology Incorporated. GRS is Gonstead Research Society. GCSS is Gonstead Clinical Studies Society. And MOM is Meeting of the Minds, and it just goes on and on the doctor mentoring that's available if you're interested. What does the Gonstead chapters cost now? About 120?
Yep, about 120.
Okay. So is there everything you need to know on Gonstead in that booklet? No. But boy, there's a lot in there. And enough in there that'll keep you busy till you graduate. There's a picture of Dr. Gonstead on the left and my mentor, Dr. Troxel, Larry Troxel, on the right when he was younger. Here's Dr. T a little older. That image is exactly how Dr. T taught us how to put our contact point on the spinous process. That's how specific we are in Gonstead. Notice that not all of the finger is up against the body of the vertebrae, just the tip. There's a quick look at a full spine film with Dr. T there. So there's my class of when I was an intern at Troxel. I graduated in 1984, and I'm in that picture somewhere. There's Dr. Casper Bauer. He's a great chiropractor that just retired. There's Dr. T on the end. I think that's me right there.
His mustache. The mustache.
Yeah. I do have a couple of short videos in here if you're interested in me playing them. Are you guys interested in them?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, here we go. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Can you turn the volume up?
It takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of study, and a lot of know-how. And I want you all of you guys to be chiropractors and not manipulators. There's a vast difference. You got to do this thing right. And I mean all of you. I've done it, I've gone through it. I've gone through a lot of shit. I started from the bottom up, from you out. I know that you're home and most of you tell you what it is, but you got to do it absolutely. These are facts. Absolutely facts. So we've got to find that. We've got to find we're really ready to copy that, and we've got to have the scientific application and the research that for the right to remove that very pressure.
What would you think of that?
It's crazy how effortlessly everything he does is. That's not rough, that's for sure.
It's not rough. And another thing too, did you notice that there's really nothing special about him physically? Right? I mean, he doesn't look like a Olympic athlete, right? It's all about touch. It's all about line of correction. It's all about being on the right one. One of the things I thought about watching my mentor, Dr. Troxel, scope patients, he made it look so easy. Well, the only reason it looked easy is because he'd done it thousands and thousands and thousands of times, right? So I would say, as a gauge, you've got to scope at least 1,000 spines to feel like you're getting used to holding the scope and trying to figure out what you're looking at on that scope. So don't get frustrated with it. Everybody goes through that. But once you get past that, it's really a great tool. Let me play this other one. It's a little shorter.
And the chiropractor without that, he's failing the true visualization. That nerve stroke is so wonderful. It's going to show on him. But if you do that, it's a better information. And it's preventing you got to do that. Very much. Anybody that's fine. And palpation is another thing. But we get the pressure off the nerve much sooner than the symptoms. But as soon as the symptoms start feeling in the back, way down here, and if you get it down into the tie down here, and this side, you got to stop density. You're not too sure about there, so but if we got the pressure reduced, and the information is to the tie down there.
What do you think of that little short gem?
Everything all of them are, I think a lot of people need to listen to those more often.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get tired of watching them, and I've seen them both a lot. That last one where he said, hey, if you're actually paying attention to your scope, the pressure will go off the nerve, or the reading will be much less on your scope before all the symptoms go away. And we tend to want to keep pounding something until we think the symptoms are gone, right? And so that was a great piece of evidence or a suggestion. Then he also said the hardest thing is to know when to stop, to let it heal.
Doc, we have another question that says, hi, Doc, do you scope all the way down to the sacrum to find whether there is a subluxation in the SI joint or sacral segment?
Yeah, I scope all the way up to the occiput, scope all the way down to the lowest part of the coccyx, the sacrum and the beginning of the coccyx that I can go. Yeah. Because sometimes there's a lot of compensation. Compensation can go from below up, or it can go from above down. That's why he made that comment there. The reason to do full spine films is not what most people think. In his mind, it was to get the occiput and the sacrum and the coccyx on the film, the ischiums of the pelvis on the film. And I think when people hear full spine, they think, oh, that means you guys don't do atlas, axis, and occiput. No, that's just not true. That was the whole idea behind the full spine film. Just because remember, the spine's an organ. We tend to teach it in school, lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine. We like to break it up into pieces because it's easier to teach it that way. But then when you do that, you kind of forget the concept that it's an organ, and the low back affects the neck, and the neck affects the lower back. We saw that this weekend in Dr. Rindle's presentation on dealing with the elderly that have balance and strength issues in their legs and their extremities. Then it's, like say for example, they have weakness in their legs, and you take full spine films and you see all kinds of biomechanical issues in their lower back and arthritis. Well, of course you would, because of their age. But they got just as much of that going on in the mid to upper cervicals, and he was showing cases where adjusting C3, C2, C5, C4, affecting reflexes and functioning of the lower back because of cord pressure in the mid-cervical region. Where have you ever heard that before? So the spine's an organ, and that's important to remember. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, and then Kay said, how do you discriminate between a break in the occiput versus hair interference?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So you may have to rely on some other things to help you pinpoint it by your palpation and their symptomatology and the biomechanics of their neck. One of the things I saw with Dr. Rindle in his presentation this weekend was that and then looking at the cervical, I was looking to see, well, if I was going to start with this patient's neck, where would I start? Well, usually you want to pick the lowest, most posterior vertebrae. But in these cases, he decided just to go for whichever one looked the most posterior. That's the one he picked, even though it might be higher than one that's posterior below it. And that's where he was getting his greatest results. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, and then Macy said, can you briefly cover whether to adjust sacrum or ilium? I think that's one of the biggest things students struggle with in finding which to adjust.
Oh, okay. That's actually one of the PowerPoints that I show at Pitt, and then also this quarter I'm helping Dr. Papagala teach his lumbopelvic technique class, and we just got done this past week talking about that. Kay, are you in quarter 4? Was that Macy? Macy's in 4 or 5? 5?
Macy's in 5, and I believe Kay's in 4.
Kay's in 4. Okay. So it's kind of hard to explain it without a spine in front of me, but think of the different pelvic listings. We have PI, we have EX, we have AS, and we have IN. So PI and EX, they're what we would call listings that behave the same way when they misalign, which means when they misalign down the joint, down the SI joint. So a PI and EX will lower the femur head. Also, if the ilium is a PI or EX, the sacrum will be anterior to it. So if you have a rotated sacrum on the side of a PI major or an EX major or just a PIEX, you'd adjust the ilium before you would adjust the sacrum, because the ilium is more posterior than the sacrum. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that's what we learned with Papagallo in class like last quarter.
Okay, and then if you have an AS or IN, that's going to do what to the femur head? That's going to raise the femur head. That's also going, the sacrum then would be posterior on the AS major, IN major, or the AS IN major. So you'd adjust the sacrum over the ilium in that case. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. Then you have the situation that you won't learn this one in school. It's called the SASIN. And that's when you have a rotated sacrum on the side of an ASIN, but on a leg check, the leg check doesn't make sense. So what I mean by that is, what does an AS, an IN, or an ASIN do to the length of the leg?
Makes it longer.
Makes it longer, right. But if you have a rotated sacrum on the side of an ASIN and you see that the length of the leg is shorter than expected, and that's really important to catch that. I didn't say short. I said shorter than expected. Then that would mean the sacrum is involved and you have to adjust the sacrum first. And the only way you can differentiate with that is that you have to have an x-ray so that you know what the measured deficiency is and the actual deficiency is. Did I lose anybody on that? I know lower quarters wouldn't know this, but how about you middle and upper quarter students? Does that make sense at all? Or did I confuse you?
How does the sacrum affect the leg in that way? I get that with the ilium, it changes kind of the orientation of where the acetabulum is. How does the sacral rotation?
Because it lifts it up.
So
As it goes, yeah, as it rotates posterior, it hikes it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we also on our for our virtual club yesterday, we did a video about the same topic. If anyone needs some visuals for that too, we tried to break it down and use visuals for all of that, and use the leg check to show you as well how Gonstead uses the leg check, not the normal leg check they teach in school, to help you guys figure that out. So we also did that if anyone wants to check that out.
Let me give you a clinical pearl. Please don't go through school thinking that your job in life as a chiropractor is to balance leg length. If that's what you think you're going to do when you are in practice, you're in for a lot of disappointment. Because if we're interested in evidence-based chiropractic, I've got several studies. One of them is a huge study that proves, and I would verify this from x-rays that I took in practice, and every Gonstead doctor that I've ever talked to would say the same thing, that 90% of our patients have one leg shorter than the other. Now, it varies in amount of shortness. It could be 1 millimeter, or it could be 10 millimeters, but 90% of our patients have one leg shorter than the other. So if you are trying to balance short legs, you're going to be wrong 90% of the time. Think about that. And you certainly can make a physiological change for a short period of time, where an anatomical leg that was short, because it is short, and then you adjust it to try to see if you can get it to go long. It may do that on it for a short period of time, but come back in 5 minutes, let the patient walk around, and it'll be short again if it's anatomically short. Just something to think about there. This was in the video, so I won't stop with that. All right, are you guys bored, or are you hanging in there okay?
So far, so good.
Okay, let's spend a little bit of time now changing gears, and let's just talk about the evidence behind why a scope, some type of instrumentation, even, if you could just say just anything, not dual probe, but why an instrument's important. Let me pull up my other PowerPoint here. Marcos, can you see this okay?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So there's Dr. Gonstead, and there's the nervoscope. You can see it right there, nervoscope. If you can get a hold of one of those, that'd be a great collector's item. And then, of course, the Delta T. What I like about the Delta T is that the thermocouples are like a Teflon type material, so the glide is much nicer than on this type of scope, although I heard now that the new, is it the Temposcopes or the Go scopes are going to the Teflon tip. The thermocouples are a little bit different. You have one filament on the Delta T. You have a wiring system on the nervoscope or the Go scopes. So if those wires get crisscrossed, you can have a short. Plus, they also fill up with oils and skin cells, excuse me, quite easily too. So from a historical perspective, the neurocoulometer was introduced in 1924. Unfortunately, BJ, I think, was a little greedy. If he really wanted the whole profession to use it, he would have made it more accessible, but he didn't. Thank goodness Dr. Gonstead did try to use it, and then he just modified it over the years. We actually have one of these in our library. Have you stopped by to see it?
Yes, people have seen it. Hey,
Yeah.
it's definitely, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
An antique.
Well, things to consider when you're scoping, your things that you saw in the patient visually. Do they have muscle imbalances? Do they have scoliosis? Do they have one leg shorter than the other? That might tip you off to which side might be more involved than the other. I think this is where we should start as to why you would want to use an instrument. Remember that the nervous system and the skin, the nervous system and the skin are embryologically tied together because they both develop from the ectodermal embryological area or layer. So any trauma, whether it be manual trauma or chemical trauma, that's going to affect that nerve root is also going to affect the blood supply in that area, as well as the oil and the sweat glands. So, to give you an example, remember in that one picture I showed you of the palpation class where they were palpating with their hands, you didn't see any scopes there. In the old days before they had the neurocoulometer, they used their hands to find what they called hot spots, which is where the skin would become puffy or just sticky from the irritation from the nerve endings and the blood supply in that area over the top of the subluxation. So let's just ask ourselves some questions. Why use an instrument? Well, we know heat is produced as a byproduct of cellular metabolism, so possibly measuring or comparing heat might give us an indication of where there's a problem. There's a venous plexus that's profusely distributed throughout the subcutaneous tissues in the vertebrae. There's our veins. The arterial supply, we have spinal branches that course with the spinal nerve. And that would include the recurrent meningeal. Afferent nerves regulate cutaneous circulation. We have a vasomotor cord reflex, which is the vascular connection to the brain. for vasoconstriction and dilation. And we know that disc derangement can create anatomical misalignment, affecting the position of the vertebrae, affecting the position of the facets, causing muscles to shorten and lengthen to accommodate. And then we also can get a local chemical response, meaning inflammation. So I have a lot of different terminology in the next couple of slides. And the idea is not to have you memorize this, but just help you understand that using an instrument is evidence-based based on anatomy and physiology. We know inflammation is caused by a local release of neuropeptides. And what do neuropeptides do? Well, they affect blood flow, vascular permeability. Afferent neurons release these neuropeptides, and there's a variety of them: substance P, calcitonin, gene-related principle, neurokinin, and so forth. So there's a direct bidirectional link between the histamine and the neuropeptides in the process of neurogenic inflammation. And those afferent neurons regulate that cutaneous circulation. An example is substance P, a neurotransmitter is released in conditions of severe pain. The disc, however, has a minimal blood supply, and it gets its nutrition through motion. However, when the disc is injured, blood supply will go into that injured disc. As far as innervation goes, the dorsal root ganglion gives rise to the recurrent meningeal, sometimes called the sinovertebral nerve, which innervates the superficial fibers of the disc, the annulus of the disc. And the neuropeptides, as we said, participate in sensory transmission. So first we have to have some kind of injury. It could be one event, it could be repetitive. But we ended up with disc derangement. And that happens with the tearing of the annular fibers and the migration of the nucleus out of the center, the perfect center. The recurrent meningeal nerve and the nociceptors in the annulus respond to that trauma. And that, of course, can cause pain either by mechanical compression or from chemical release as a result of the trauma, the inflammation. So when we run our scope down a patient's spine, that's why we're so interested in the level of the disc, because we're saying that's where the subluxation happens, is at that nerve root, at that disc level. Does that not make sense to anybody? Okay. So we have an ascending and a descending branch of the recurrent meningeal. And then, of course, we have the dorsal root ganglion. We have the disc annulus, posterior longitudinal ligament. Have you heard of this terminology before, the 5 phases of nociceptive pain? Did they go through this at school?
Yes, they do.
Okay. So if you can think of a better way of describing this terminology, let me know. These are the definitions or explanations that I came up with. Transduction is the electrical current generated by noxious stimuli. Conduction is when axons to cell bodies go through the dorsal root ganglion. Transmission was referring to neurotransmitters in the dorsal horn synapses that release the neuropeptides, which we call substance P. So he's just giving you an example of the nociceptive transmission at the dorsal horn there. Perception is a signal sent to the brain high center to perceive the pain. Modulation is the control system of the dorsal horn signals inhibition and facilitation to the lower brainstem. And then within modulation, we have the combination of inhibition and facilitation. Inhibition acts in a time of injury as anesthesia. Inhibition to decrease the pain or your feeling of the pain, and facilitation, acts as a fight or flight mechanism as a protective behavior. So nerves fire both directions up and down the spinal cord during the modulation phase. Don't have to memorize this, just showing you the track. All right, so getting back to clinical, the where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We're using a temperature differential recording instrument called our dual probe. We're comparing one side of the spine to the other, and almost always one side is more affected than the other. We have both muscle and vascular readings, so we have to differentiate between heat swings, muscle imbalances causing those heat swings, and then what a break is. And that's takes a while to figure that out. So the break, if it's going to happen, has to happen at the disc spinal level, and it is a peak, or the very end of the break is a sharp, quick horizontal deflection of the pointer at a particular disc level. And I can tell you sometimes because of spinous process imbrication, or somebody might have a hyperlordosis, that can be pretty tough because of overlapping tissue. And when if you think it's 3, it could be 4 or it could be 5. That's why you have to use more than just your instrument to isolate it. But it really gets you close. It really gets you close. So we typically say in acute disc, the pointer will deflect to the side of the open disc wedge. Chronic disc, the pointer will deflect away from the disc wedge. And cord pressure, which is very rare. In fact, if you ever find it in pit, please let me know. I want to see it. But it's usually found at the upper cervical spine, causing bilateral vasomotor disturbance over many motion segments.
Dr. Meisel, if someone presents with cord pressure when you're scoping them, are they going to have any kind of telltale signs that'll differ for somebody who just has normal breaks on their spine?
Yeah, I think they're kind of a sneaky patient as far as what's wrong with them.
Can you give an example?
Well, say for example, they come in with low back pain, and you're not finding anything wrong with their lower back, or not much at all. It's not matching the severity of their pain. That's when I start thinking about, it's probably not in their lower back. It's probably coming from their feet, or it could be coming from upper cervical somewhere.
Where would you start?
Well, I always start at the point of pain. Anytime a patient says my low back hurts, my neck hurts, that's where I start. I want them to know that I'm going to look at their problem. And then from there, I just go from I want to check their whole spine. Even if they just have, let's say their chief complaint is headaches, I'm checking their lower back. That's part of my chiropractic exam. I'm scoping their full spine. I don't care what their symptoms are, because I know it's an organ, and I know if I just compartmentalize it, later on I'm going to miss out on a lot. We talked about in X-ray lab this week. What if a patient comes in, they're really antalgic, and you can't get them on a full spine film? What's the answer to that?
Take as much as you can get.
Good answer. And then what happens when they're nice and straight? Let's say you got them in, let's say 6 visits, you got them nice and straight. Now what do?
Take a new picture.
Take a new picture. Why?
It's a different person.
Totally different person, right? And guess what they're going to start complaining about when you get them standing up?
Something higher up.
Yep, they're going to start complaining about their neck. Oh, I didn't tell you, Doc. By the way, yeah, I get these really bad migraine headaches, and yeah, and like my neck is really stiff right now, like it usually does before I get a headache. I mean, you just know it's coming. And so, yeah, if you can't get them on the full spine film, then at least take enough to where you can, work on their initial emergency problem, but they're a totally different person. Even their lower back is totally different. And whatever you were fixing, if you were doing the right thing, that should look different on that new film. Because you don't want to be adjusting off that old film, especially if they're, done being acute. Now they're a different person. I'm not going to play this video because this is the same video on this one that as the last one on the previous PowerPoint. So we'll skip that. If you're wondering, these are the references that I got for the material that I gave you. Marcos has done a great job. He made his own PowerPoint on instrumentation.
Did you want me to show it, Doc?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Alright. Yeah, so a lot of this stuff, I got most of my information as well from Dr. Meisel's PowerPoint, and also from some VMI things that we got sent to us to help. But can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can see it.
All right, awesome. So this is just a little bit more. Dr. Meisel kind of went into the history about how BJ introduced it and how Dr. Gonstead was able to revise it and revise the interpretation of what we were seeing, because it wasn't necessarily used. BJ didn't necessarily use it the way that Dr. Gonstead did. He revised a lot about it, and as you can see in the bottom right corner, that's the delta T that Dr. Meisel uses, and a lot of us. And then this is a nervoscope, which is also another form of dual probe instrumentation. This is just why we use it in our analysis, just because, like Dr. Meisel said, the skin is directly linked to the central nervous system, as well as the peripheral nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So what I kind of compiled in this PowerPoint was just as much of the recent evidence that is out there in the medical world about physiology, and then also all the great stuff that Dr. Meisel and GMI has made as well. And then we learned that the vertebral subluxation has direct and indirect effects to the nervous system, as well as the peripheral nervous system and autonomic nervous system. That's why when we are taking this case history, we can see is it sympathetic, parasympathetic, because that subluxation directly affects all of these different types of nervous systems. And when it activates, subluxation is present, it activates the cutaneous axon reflex, which I have a slide for it as we go through. And this is pretty much just a breakdown of each. I'm not going to read all of this to you guys because it's probably a lot of boring stuff, but it's pretty much just the direct way that the skin is linked to the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system. Like Dr. Meisel said, it's from the same embryologic layer, and then various stressors that we're taught right in quarter one with Dr. Meisel, thoughts, traumas, and toxins, activate the hypothalamus and the hypophysis within the central nervous system, causing release, and then this trickle-down domino effect will occur after that stressor of a thought, a trauma, or a toxin. And then it releases certain neuromediators, and then also that affect the immune responses within our immune system. So this is another great way to tie together how chiropractic and immunology are tied together based on this article that I referenced here. And then it goes through which cells are used and which neuropeptides are used and activated. So if anyone wants to really dig deep into that stuff, I can send this PowerPoint to you after this. This is right in our chapters. It's in the first, I think, either the first or second paragraph in the instrumentation chapter, that every subluxation produces an objective evidence of its existence. And the most reliable sign is in the form of abnormal temperatures in the paravertebral tissues. So this is right from our Gonstead chapters, right there. And then we just kind of go into the vertebral subluxation. So the subluxation arises from a shift of the vertebral body, compressing the intervertebral disc and exerting pressure on the nucleus. Annular fibers will begin to stretch beyond its limit, damaging them and then causing the nucleus to protrude out. After talking with Dr. O'Hara this weekend, we also discussed how the nucleus isn't just one ball, as we're used to describing it. It's cut in half. So there's a superior part of the nucleus and an inferior part of the nucleus that they discovered through studies. And it actually, those subluxations present different and require just slight different lines of drive. So the Gonstead system's constantly getting more and more information and updating, and that's how much specificity we're going into of how much our different line of drive and how to palpate this stuff. Then we go into just some characteristics about the disc, because to understand what we're looking for, we need to know the mechanism behind the subluxation and the mechanism of the disc that we're working with. Like Dr. Meisel also said before, our goal isn't to reposition bones. It's to place the body of the bone properly on top of the disc. So that's what our goal always is. So once we kind of understand that, now it's important to understand the characteristics of the disc. So the outside part of that disc is the annulus that we're going to learn very religiously in school, which is very important. And then the nucleus is on the inner side. The blood supply to the nucleus, kind of how Dr. Meisel said, after age 25, the only way nutrients reach the disc is through motion. When we're younger, we get a little bit luckier because we get it through direct blood supply. But after 25, motion is key. So that's why when we see thinning of discs, it's not just a normal part of aging. It's just lack of motion or a fixated segment that's not allowing motion of that disc to lose its nutrients. So that's very important to know. And then just a little bit more about the innervation of it. So the DRG gives rise to the recurrent meningeal nerve that innervates the superficial fibers of the annulus, which even reaches the nucleus in really degenerated discs. And then we see these two neuropeptides are going to be kind of your bread and butter for describing what happens with the scope. So substance P and calcitonin gene-related peptide, they have a very big part into why we are able to see what we see on the scope and why it is actually extremely reliable. Then we just kind of go into how the subluxation affects the disc. So the disruption of that functional relationship, like we always talk about, between the nucleus and the annulus, due to either micro traumas of constantly sitting down and bending over like we are, or someone shoveling and doing something consistently, or a macro trauma of falling. So all of these can cause the subluxation and affect the disc. And then it just causes positional dyskinesia of the vertebra, muscular imbalances, apparent neurological communication from the body to the brain and then back to the body. So that's that safety pin cycle that we always reference when we're talking about that type of stuff. Let's see. And this is a very cool stat I thought is important that I saw from Gonstead Chiropractic book that someone in Australia wrote, that just 10 millimeters worth of pressure, I don't know how to eat, milligram, I don't know, very small amount of nerve pressure on the nerve roots causes 60% of blockage of transmission of that nerve. To put that into perspective, that's a half pinch of salt or just a 2 millimeter by 2 millimeter micro SD card. So just half a pinch of salt of pressure on a nerve root, which is what we deal with, is going to cause 60% conduction blockage of transmission of that nerve. So you can see just even slight pressure from inflammation could cause major neurological problems in the in the spine and the rest of the body. And Dr. Gonstead always said that the nervous scope provides the chiropractor with easily obtainable analytic information and serves as one of the features in the total analysis of the patient. When coupled with other aspects of the patient examination, it serves as an excellent aid to the chiropractor. So, I mean, this is coming from the man himself, and it's extremely important to also recognize that we're not saying that instrumentation is the end-all be-all, motion palpation is the end-all be-all, X-ray is not the end-all be-all. It's about the combination of everything that Dr. Meisel showed as we started. That really is what, that's the end-all be-all, is the combination of everything and putting as much evidence into this patient as possible and saying what is telling me to go where. And then this is the cutaneous axonal reflex, which really dives deep into why our scope picks up what it does. So the cutaneous axonal reflex is when the vertebral subluxation complex occurs. It directly engages the posterior primary rami and the recurrent meningeal nerve that initiates from the autonomic nervous system. So when this occurs, the subluxation causes that recurrent meningeal nerve to become irritated, and then that recurrent meningeal nerve innervates the articular capsule, the posterior longitudinal ligament, and the annulus of the disc. So that is a lot of very important structures for the motor unit of a vertebra. So the recurrent meningeal nerve also wraps around the spinous process. So that's why when we are in quarter one and we're palpating people's spinuses, and from there on out, that's why there's a point of tenderness over the spinous, because the recurrent meningeal nerve, if it's irritated, can cause that spinous to be tender. The byproduct of this irritated recurrent meningeal nerve is, like we said, that substance P and that CGRP, or calcitonin gene-related peptide. So when those are present, substance P is a nociceptive chemical that causes the venous capillary beds. So Dr. Meisel showed how that venous innervation is there in the spinal unit. There's also a arterial structures in that spinal unit as well. So when we see substance P in that area, that causes the venous capillary beds to leak out into the IVF. So that's why when we're going through that, we're scoping, that sharp deflection to that one side is due to the substance P and calcitonin gene-related peptide, because all of those capillary beds are leaking, and that's just giving all of that extra inflammation right in that IVF, because that's the area of least resistance. That's why at the seminar, when they said that posterior lateral angle is the highest direction of a disc protrusion or just a disc bulge, that's exactly where these chemicals go. So calcitonin gene-related peptide actually has multiple functions, which I found pretty interesting, that when it comes from the ventral horn, it's associated with peripheral nerve regeneration. But when it comes from the dorsal horn, which is where that posterior lateral bulge is, it's associated with nociception, which is also pain, vasodilation, and then now leakage of the arterial capillary beds. So when these two substances are there, they're causing a lot of leakage from both the venous and the arterial capillary beds. And that's why when we go over just that one specific level where the disc and the nerve root exits, that's our break. So these substances are incredible for finding out why we do things. And then when what happens when they're present, substance P and CGRP aggravate the piezometric fibers that are also in the spine. So that's why when Dr. Gonstead smacked someone on the back a bunch of times, it actually made this reading come out even more obvious for him. And when he goes down, the piezometric fibers, once they're activated, they force an increased friction coefficient at the level of the inflamed nerve. So that's why every time we go over again and again, we activate those piezometric fibers, and then the substance P and CGRP become even more exacerbated. So that's why when we keep going over, we see it again and again and again. And it can also explain that sudoriferous edema that Dr. Meisel talked about, that tacky feeling at that area. That's these piezometric fibers and these substances coming out and being there at that level. So how does this affect the nerve? is just as important as why that break occurs. The effects of substance P and CGRP follow the involved spinal nerve in a retrograde manner to the skin periphery. And then that's exactly how we can see it on the skin. And this is, again, how we tie the vertebral subluxation to the scope reading. It's these chemicals reactions at a specific spinal level due to all these factors. Okay? And this was actually from GMI, and it was actually at the clinic. I don't know if you guys saw it downstairs where they were serving coffee and food, but this drawing is also there, which is pretty cool to have a drawing of it, and they have little tidbits in there as well. And then, like Dr. Meisel said, we have dual probe instruments, and the purpose of pinpointing the location of a possible subluxation. Again, not guaranteeing it is, it's just a possible subluxation. And it can also indicate the intensity of the nerve interference as well. As also Dr. Meisel said, it shows when the patient is progressing and when to stop. So if we're going through and we get a break 10 points to the left, and then our next visit, the patient says they're feeling better, we're scoping, and this time it's just a nice heat swing to the right, or even just a 1 point break to the left, which is ever slightly, then that's telling us that maybe we should give it another time or another visit to let it heal and not overstimulate that patient. This is some just little notes on the settings. If you're using a nervoscope, you want to start on high, and then if there's too much noise, you can switch it to low. And you have to warm up the instrument to the skin and making sure it centers and it stops moving before you start to glide, or it'll throw off everything. The delta T, it says that Dr. Carr recommends you actually start on a low setting because of how sensitive it is. And you also don't need to warm these battery-operated instruments to the skin before the glide. So if the patient is, you don't need to worry too much about the different temperature from the scope to the patient. You just want to make sure it stops. But I thought it was interesting that Dr. Carr said you want to start on low as opposed to the nervoscope. You want to start at high just because of how sensitive each one is. And then this is kind of just a little description of when we are scoping. As you can see, I know it's hard with the angle, but how wide the nerve roots exit in the cervical spine. And in school, they're going to teach you to narrow them in because they think the neck is more narrow than the back, which is obviously true. But the nerve roots actually exit the spine at a wider area than the lumbar spine. As you can see down here, over on this right side, this is the lumbar spine, and you can see how much narrow you can be because you're getting right at those nerve roots, and just anatomically, the width of where the nerve root exits is smaller in the lumbar spine and the lower thoracics as opposed to the mid-upper thoracics and the cervical spine. So that's why we want to have them wider apart for that area and narrow apart for those. And again, we want to see where the nerve root exits because that stat that I said, just a half a pinch of salt at that nerve root causes a lot of irritation. As you get further out, you can get away, I think they said, with like a quarter worth of pressure at the peripheral nerve, but we're worried about the centralized nerve root. And then Josiah made this when we were actually in person for a club, and we were able to have handouts, but the instrumentation 100% rules, there's only a couple. But the probes must never break contact with the skin because once air comes in, it invalidates all readings. Because then you're not comparing side to side, you're comparing outside temperature to the surface of a human, which is very, very different. And then you want to be 90 degrees to the surface of the body. So as you can see what Josiah did here, he's staying 90 degrees to whatever segment he's doing. These are always 90 degrees. The spine has its lordosis and kyphotic curves, but he has to stay 90 degrees to there or he might get a little bit of a altered reading. And then you must always follow the nerve roots however possible. So as you can see in the scoliosis, the scope needs to follow. We can't just go straight down because now we're not comparing the right nerve root to the left nerve root. we're just comparing random skin spots. So you need to know if you have a scoliosis, you can mark the spine, but you definitely want to follow it as you go around. And then we also always want to do an initial glide just to get the skin warmed up and get those piezometric fibers firing really well. And something that we found that I saw in the GMI PowerPoint is you glide up from T5 to the occiput. And this should be about 3 seconds per segment, because if you go too fast, you're going to miss things, or it's not made to pick up certain differences if you're going too fast. So if you go too fast, you're going to miss it, and you're going to be off where you mark it as well, even if you do get it. And then when you're gliding down from T5 to S5, the speed should always be 2 seconds per segment, again, to make sure you're not going too fast. This was an awesome sketch by Josiah, so we have to give him credit for that. That's pretty cool how he did that. And then interpretation of the break, it has to do with, again, the anatomy. So everything that is in the Gonstead work, that at least in my short time of doing it, I realize there's always a reason for everything, and it's pretty scientific, every reason. So all of these reasons for where to mark your break is just in relation to the anatomy of the spot by the time you read the break. So it's hard to go through this without actually seeing a spine. So I'll just send this again out to anyone that wants it. Just reach out to me. But you can see that as you go through the spine. It's important to know that you go all the way down to S5. That's probably the biggest part about this, because you don't want to miss any of the iliums or any of the sacral segments as well. This was a pretty cool point that I definitely feel like I forget sometimes, but interpretation of the level of the break with an inferior segment. So a posterior inferior fifth lumbar, you don't mark, so in the lumbar spine, you mark the break at the inferior quarter of the spinous. So it'd be right there, or right there, or right there, the bottom quarter of it. But if there's a posterior inferior L5 and you mark it at the bottom quarter of it, you're probably going to inaccurately mark it, and you could even be marking an L4 and it could just probably be on the wrong bone. So that's why we have our X-ray analysis as well. We see that spine, how it's presenting. What Dr. Meisel always told us was you put BBs at the spot of your break and also moles, so then you can know exactly what level your break's at. Because if a bone is posterior or inferior, you might be one too high or one too low because you're going based on the spinous. And again, it's based on the nerve root, not the spinous process. So Dr. Denny O'Hara, who we got blessed enough to meet this weekend, has said it's entirely possible to have a reading at 1 or 2 levels above or below the subluxation level due to the neurological convergence of the spinal nerve roots and the autonomic nervous system relationship. Therefore, our digital palpation shall always be the deciding factor in our decision-making, in his opinion. Again, just emphasizing the point, we don't put our eggs in one basket. We spread it out among the 5 to 6 parts that we use in our system, and that will help us really get correct a lot of percentage of the time. And this is just another diagram that Dr. Meisel kind of went over, and you guys can go through this when I send this to you, but it's important to see what the heat, which is just a regular heat swing, how sharp that deflection is at an exact level. And it's important to also see that sometimes it's going to the opposite direction of the heat. That's still saying that there's a break right at this level, wherever that nerve root is. Again, more sketches, and this is pretty cool because this is telling us that this is not a subluxation. This is a compensation, and we can figure it out because it went away. As you can see, the first time, there's definitely a deflection. Second time, there's still a deflection, but it's minimal. Then the third time you see it, it's completely gone. So that's why this is telling us this is not the spot you adjust. This is a big X there for you because it's not a break. It's a compensation, and that's important to see. So instrumentation of the pelvis. This kind of goes into what I think Macy asked about how to decide between sacrum and ilium. This is just one of those aspects that you can do. That's also in our video that we talked about, that we posted. But you want to notice where the heat is. So if you just think of the anatomy, when there's an EX ilium and that ilium is open, and Chris and Rachel did an awesome job describing this as well, and their video is going to be posted right after this about Fundamentals Club. But the side of the EX ilium is going to have such an open space that that's where the heat's going to be. Or even a posterior rotated sacrum on that side will have heat there because of just how that joint space is gapped and how much more can come from that. And then in the back of your head, you also have to think of, it could be an acetabular problem if it's lower in the pelvis. So you can see how acetabular's right there. You're at S4, S5. That could also be an acetabulum problem over to that specific section. The reason why we think it's the EX side and not the IN is just because of what happens with the pelvis when there is an EX or an IN. And then this just kind of talks about how we keep the probes narrow when we go down that area, and we have to stay in the middle of the sacrum. So then we'll see whether or not the break is to the right or to the left. And then say on point 2 here, if the break was to the right, then you run the instrument down the right SI joint and note the level and direction of that break. I'll show a picture. I think it's on the next slide. But yeah, let's just go to that next slide. So you can see that I'm going down the middle, and then there's a break to the right, let's say. And then we scope each side of the SI joint. And then if we see the break goes again to the right, that's telling us that this is more of an ilium problem. We're going down and it breaks to the left. This could be a sacral tubercle problem or just a posterior sacrum on this side. It can be a bunch of things. Down that side joint. Yep, and that's pretty much just saying what I just said there. And then this is just sketches again to kind of help you visualize it. I know it's hard since we can't do this in person and actually scope, but if you can visualize this and recognize it when you see something, then you'll be able to kind of figure this out as you're going through. So this is just sketches GMI made, and you guys can check that out. I know you guys have been here for a couple hours already, so I don't want to hold it too much longer. But this is again just saying what it can mean when it breaks towards the sacrum. It could be a base posterior, it could be a sacral segment or a rotated sacrum. You also have to be aware of where you are in the spine. So if you're getting a break at S1 to the right, and then you're on the right SI joint and it breaks left, it could also be a posterior L5 that you have to be. So you have to keep all of these different possibility and differentials in your head and not rule anything out until you're getting firm evidence that it's not that issue. And then this is pretty cool because it says if the break's not at the same level, we can't draw a conclusion based on our instrument findings. So if we get a break here at S1, and then we scope the SI joints, and then this break is at S3, these are different findings, and it's saying that you can't make a definite decision based on your scope reading if they're at different segments, which I thought was pretty cool. Then cambering, Dr. Meisel does this a lot if you guys ever get a chance to watch him do it. And that's just to help see if there is bilateral interference due to cord pressure. And cord pressure can happen in that one that we saw with that was all the way to the right and stayed right. But cord pressure can also happen at a lot of the junction sites, like the CT junction and the TL junction. And you got to keep your eye on that. So if you are pretty sure that there's something going on in the area where either the spinal cord foramen is getting bigger or narrower, you think there's something going on, just put the scope to its side, then you'll be able to hit that level at different timings. Then you'll see like a break and then a break right after from the two different points that the scope crossed those areas. That just kind of goes over when to camber, how to camber, And like it's very important at levels of cord enlargement. So that CT junction, that TL junction, you'll see after those segments, if you see the scope stays to one side after that CT junction, it's staying on the right, that can tell you that there's probably something at that CT junction that's causing some pressure, or even at that TL junction after T10, and you see, oh, it's staying left the whole time down past the sacrum. That could also be that. And then we can never count out that a sacrum is causing cord pressure, just as if an atlas causes cord pressure all the way up and down. So you want to remember we're a foundational approach type of technique and never rule out anything. That's the beauty of full spine. We never rule any segment out until one of our evidence finders pretty much tells us to. So that's what makes it super important. Then this is just some of the errors that we see a lot, and that, I mean, every single one of us except Dr. Meisel still makes, that we use too much or too little pressure, causing air leaks, or just if you feed in too much, it can overstimulate those sensors. So you want to be firm, but not too much, pretty much. Uneven pressure on the probes. This happens all the time when someone has very pronounced paraspinals on the right and then not so much on the left. And then we're putting so much pressure on the left, not enough on the right, it's going to read differently. So you want to make sure if you have to angle it, you angle it right and you keep going so there's equal pressure on each side of the probes. Following the spine is huge. With that little picture that Josiah made, how to follow the scoliosis and also follow the kyphosis and lordosis is very important. Pushing the skin up or down as you glide, causing an error in the level you mark the break. So if someone with saggy skin, if you're pulling that skin out of the way and then you scope and then you mark a break and let that skin go, it'll probably drop down. So we need to be sure that we're marking the right section. Repeating the glide to bring out the break or to lose the break, as we saw in this section, or this one. This one, it got bigger each time. This one, it diminished. Not marking the break at the peak is definitely something that I struggle with continuously, is I mark a recession. So if you see, as we're following this one on this right side, here, you get the break, and then I end up marking right here because I just miss it sometimes. And that's the break. So this will cause you to be one or two segments off, but that's why palpation is also very important. But you want to mark the peak, not the recession. We vary glide speed a lot. I mean, when we think there's a break, for some reason, we all like to just stop at the break. We never go past it. So you always want to keep going past it and making sure that you're going to be consistent with your speed, because if you're fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, the meters can look like a break all the time. So you want to be consistent with that. Skin lesions are always hard to go around if there's a mole or a scar or blemishes like pimples. That it gets hard to go around, but you kind of just have to figure out a way to not run over that one and make it look like a break, or you're just going to dismiss that whole segment level. So they said you can consider running the instrument slightly off-center to avoid these areas. So if you need to go slightly more to the left or slightly more to the right, that's more reliable than just running over that pimple. Considerations, hairy backs. This is going to happen to everyone in practice. Just use you can't just shave every hairy back you guys get. We got to use low settings and just slow down our glide. Okay.
Dr. Gonstead did, Marcos.
Yeah, well, Dr. Gonstead did. He got the respect from everyone before they even came in. So
he got away with a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. But also being aware that certain drugs affect the scope. I'm still trying to find which drugs exactly, so that's why there's no further points about that. But just be aware that if someone is a chronic drug user or they are under the influence of anything, that it can affect the scope. If you notice a lot of hyperemia or red marks throughout the whole spine, this is also something that can go into diet, and it seems like they're very acidic, they're eating a lot of red foods, or they're over caffeinated. So if you see this in certain patients when you're scoping them, it's wouldn't be a bad idea to even talk to them about the chemical imbalance or realizing what segments could be associated with chemical imbalances and how their body's not able to process those chemicals correctly. Organic problems may also cause pain at the spine. Organic problems may not cause pain at the spine, but a break will occur. So an example would be a T6 break, an acid reflux that happens an hour after they eat, but there's no mid-back pain or tenderness at that spinous. Sometimes that's not going to be there, but the break will bring this out to times where if we didn't have the scope, we would miss this area because it's not taut and tender, and it might just be fixated, and we see this break. So that's why using everything is very important. Record keeping, which is also pretty important to help you know when not to adjust. Knowing the level of the break, the direction of the break, and how much it did break. So again, if we see a break to the left at 15 points, then the next visit they break to the left at 2 points, their body's still healing and they're still going through that healing process. It might be wise at that time to leave it for that adjustment. And just notating how to write it, T6 to the left at plus 10, or however you want to decide to write it, but just knowing how much you're doing. You can also use the Titron, like Dr. Meisel said, for pattern analysis. And it's very important to do this before taking films, because we can place a small BB at the skin at the level of the break, and then a large BB at permanent skin lesions and moles or tattoos that can say, okay, whenever I see this mole, this is always L3. And then, oh, my BB is right here. So now I can find L3, and that's reliable to count from, and then I know which segment is responsible for that break. They said from GMI that there isn't much correlation between the break and the listing. So this is, again, just really focusing on where the break is, and this is telling us where the problem is, not how to fix it necessarily. So we use our visualization, static motion palpation, and spinography to do this stuff. And yeah, I don't know. You guys could read the atlas part because it was a little confusing, but apparently they found some correlation between the fossa readings using the temperature, which is a whole different thing than using this instrument. So I'll save that for a later date. GMI has came out and said that they haven't found much of a correlation. This was their most recent PowerPoint that they sent me, that there wasn't much of a correlation between chronic and acute, because 24 to 48 hours after an injury, the body is in a chronic state physiologically. So they've made that determination from their seminars and their group that they're not going to consider chronic or acute, but I'm sure people have had experience in the past that say otherwise. And does the instrument point to a subluxation? The instrument itself does not show a subluxation, but rather an objective finding that a subluxation can be present. And our Gonstead analysis includes all of these, so all of these must be used together, and that's definitely an emphasis that we need to keep having on that. And telling us when not to adjust, I kind of went over a little bit of that, but some considerations that an instrument reading, a full post-check occurs 6 hours minimum after the adjustment for there to be some sort of change, but they found that an atlas change will be much sooner as opposed to a mid or low back, just based on surrounding structures and how much influence it has from other things. Other cues tell you to give it more time, and motion palpation too. So if you're still getting a break there and the scope and that hasn't caught up yet, and you feel the segments are moving well, then it's a pretty good idea to still leave it alone. Just because there's a break, again, doesn't guarantee that you're going to be adjusting on that segment every time. And use just everything of our system. So Dr. Meisel says this. I've heard a bunch of people say this before. You can always give one more adjustment, but you can never take one adjustment back. So it's better to aid on the side of caution for some of these than to overdo it. And if nothing changes that you're noticing from your adjusting, from your instrumentation, your symptoms, other exam findings, and it's been after normally 6 visits, for a Gonstead doctor, 6 visits is enough for them to be like, okay, I'm probably doing something wrong. For other docs, they say 4 to 6 weeks. But this is just some things to consider. Are you on the right segment? Do you have the right listings? Are there any lifestyle things that the patient is doing that is not allowing their patient to hold the adjustment? And is it at a different level? Like we said, like, is it from the sacrum when there's core pressure and you're adjusting upper cervical? Because it could be both. Is there an initial breaker heat swing in the upper cervicals that can be from a lower subluxation, like a T2? So there are so many other factors that after 6 visits, normally due to our specificity, we should see some positive change by then. And if we're not, it's time to re-examine our application. Dr. Gonstead said the principles of the Gonstead method are the simple principles of chiropractic put to work. How to understand what causes nerve pressure, how to find it on the patient, how to achieve a corrective setting of the offending vertebra, and how to know when the chiropractor's job is done and it's time for nature to begin, which is pretty important. And then these are just my citations from everyone that I found all this information from. And this one right here, Dr. Meisel, GCSS Educator of the Year. I used that PowerPoint that he actually went over with today. So this is just all my findings, but thank you for letting me do that, Doc.
You're welcome. Great job, Marcos. Great job.
Thank you.
All right, so we can go till 9 if you want to go till 9, answering questions or about instrumentation, or it could just be anything about this weekend that you had a question about, or anything about just what you're doing in school with technique or treating patients at clinic. Just kind of just an open line pit, maybe. Looks like Coop has a question. I see he's raising his hand for about 45 minutes.
So, Doc, when did you find that, how many times did you see that instrumentation didn't really catch up yet to your adjustment? Especially within a really acute case and they're staying, maybe laying down at your office?
You mean like when they're getting better, but the instrumentation is still there?
Yeah, or when they're super acute, something.
Well, you put the two together, right? So you don't want to over adjust. So I don't know if you caught in that one video, but of Gonstead, there was one question where they asked him about the pain going down the leg. So in school, I think they're going to teach you the other way. They're going to teach you that it'll heal from the bottom up. It actually heals from the top down at the nerve root level. So as the pain starts going down the leg, even though you got an instrumentation reading, you better start thinking about leaving it alone. Otherwise, you're going to over adjust it, especially in the case of a sciatic, any kind of neuropathy, pain down an extremity. When the pain starts moving down the arm, that means you probably are getting close to making it worse if you don't back off. It's healing, but you can just overdo it, and it's really hard to undo something like that. And that's why Gonstead said, "Take a new picture." You've kicked it out. He used that term. You've kicked it out.
Anyone has any questions, you can type in the chat, and we can ask for you too.
Dr. Meisel, how is it, or why is it that when the pain is getting better, you'll start to see it go down the extremity, or when you're correcting subluxation, why does it happen that the pain goes down the extremity?
Well, it's in the whole extremity to begin with by the time you're in the middle of it. So when you start correcting it, it's going to start healing at the source.
Okay. So how do you go about explaining that to the patient? Because I'm sure they would think they'd be getting worse.
Well, that's why you tell them ahead of time, so they know that that's not the case. So a lot of it depends on where they're at when they come see you, right? So if they don't have sciatica, they just have back pain. When you start with them, and they start having sciatica, you better stop and rethink what you're doing, because you're probably causing the sciatica. But if they come into you, let's say, and they already have sciatic type pain going all the way down the leg past the knee, when you start helping it, it's not going to feel better down in the calf first. It's going to feel better at the source of where the subluxation is first, because you're getting the pressure off the nerve, and then below that it's already all inflamed. So that's why it's going to, the symptomatology will lag behind and go down the leg.
Okay.
That's how I would explain it to the patient. And they'll say, yeah, sure enough, doc, my back feels a whole lot better, but oh man, can you do something about that pain in my calf? Well, yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there. Be patient. That's why we call you a patient. But it's doing what you told them that it was going to do, that it's moving down the leg. But then you just got to be careful to know when to not over-adjust it. I told some of you the story of Dr. Troxel, where he had a really bad low back. And one time he had an episode where he had to spend a month up at Dr. Gonstead's clinic. And it took him a half hour to get from the bed to the toilet, and another half hour to get from the toilet back to the bed. And Gonstead would come in there three times a day for days to try to help him. And he tells us that Troxel told us that there was a period of time of about 3 days where Gonstead, in the middle of his severe pain, did not adjust him. He scoped him, he palpated him, and he said, "No, Larry, we're going to leave it alone. No, Larry, we're going to leave it alone this time." And T said out loud, he said, right back to Gonstead, "You got to be kidding me." What do you mean? I can't even stand up. That's not what his scope was telling him. That's not what his palpation was telling him. That's somebody who really has trust, I guess, in what's going on with their hands and what they're seeing with their tools. But you only get that way by seeing the number of people that he saw. By that time, Gonstead probably have seen just about everything you could see in practice by then. So, did that answer your question, Steve? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So Valentino said, Dr. at the extravaganza said that when you are not sure about the listings because of the lack of x-rays, you can remove the posteriority of the segment without paying that much attention to the laterality. For example, if you think that the listing is PLI, but you're not sure, you treat it as a PL. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I guess I can somewhat agree with that. I would, a lot of times, especially if from L1 all the way up to the upper dorsals, you could do a double thumb or double thenar and just have, your thumbs or your thenars, really close. You're not out here. You're right. Each thumb is right on the left and right side of the spinous, so you're going to get out mainly P. So yeah, we talk a lot about rotation and disc wedging and how important all that is, but in the long run, none of that matters until you get on the P and correct the P.
Did you find yourself where if you're in between like a P, like he said, a PLI or a PLS, to go towards that double thenar or double thumb? That's what you would more go for, as opposed to a single hand? Or
I did a lot of double double thumb, double thenar. Gonstead did too. In fact, he did more of that than he did the single hand contact at the beginning of his career. So when he was trying to be more specific, especially with, but I mean, I did a mix of both. So whatever I thought I could get the best adjustment on would be the way I would do it on any given patient. Sometimes you don't know that right away.
Yeah.
I know with me, if somebody's going to adjust my upper lumbar, lower dorsal, I have a harder time letting them have it as a single hand than I do if I feel a double thumb or double thenar.
Okay.
Or if somebody can get a really good fleshy pisiform, and then just really be right midline in the middle, I can let them have it. But if I feel too much left or right on my spinous down there, I'm gonna win every time.
I know too much.
I know too much. Yeah. But if you can line me up to get the posteriority out of there, you got me. It's gonna go. Yeah. And not all your patients can give you feedback like that. So sometimes it's just a matter of trial and error by how it sounds, how much you feel it move, and then just like there are times when you think maybe you didn't get something so good, but on the next visit they'll say, "Doc, I don't know what you did, but man, that was the best adjustment I've ever had." And you look in your notes and you look, "Gee, I didn't know that I thought that was that great." Or there's times when you think, you gave $1 million adjustment and you're feeling really good about it, and then they come back the next day, "Doc, I don't know what you did, but man, you gave me one heck of a headache." Or, "Oh, that pain that you did so great with? Well, it came back not more than a half hour after I left your office." And you just go, "What?" It's going back to, was I sloppy? Was I on the wrong bone? Did I, was my line of drive wrong? What did I do? And sometimes it's us, but also sometimes you need to ask the patient, well, what did you do when you left the office? "Oh, well, I went to the grocery store and I lifted this and lifted that." "Oh, okay." So sometimes it's not always your fault. Sometimes you got to ask some questions, but yeah, it's always hard to pull back.
So now make that last one more adjustment.
Yeah. The best check is your next visit.
Dr.
Hi, Michelle.
You mentioned visceral issues, and I wanted to ask if there's like an actual visceral issue, like let's say they had like lung cancer or something, could that essentially like refer back all the way to the nerve root and cause a break?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
So what would you do in that situation?
So I guess it depends if they know they have cancer, right? If somebody's already, they know they have a cancer, they're already under medical care, that doesn't mean you can't treat them. And you're not treating cancer, you're treating subluxation. So chances are you can only help them, not hurt them. But if you're treating them and it's unknown to the patient that they have cancer and you miss something, or if they're not getting better and you think there might be something else going on, like a pathology, you better make the referral then. You don't want to treat that one all out there by yourself.
How long, or maybe how many visits will you take before you start thinking there's something else, pathology, and that you're not just on the wrong segment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it depends on how bad they look on the film.
Okay.
What else do you see on the film? How bad their spine is? Are they 25 or are they 85? So, but no matter who you are, unless you're really elderly, then I'll up the number. But I would say if you're 40 years old or younger, whatever it is you came in to see me for, you need to be showing some significant improvement by that 6th visit.
Okay.
Even if you want to stretch it out to 10, right? Are they cured? Not necessarily, but you need to see some positive signs. Now, once someone is over 40 years of age, you know, that you need a little bit more time usually. That help?
Yes. Yeah. That answers it.
Like in my case, with my condition, I've got a compression fracture and I've got other stuff going on, so I know the state of what my spine is in, but I can get pretty quick relief with, you know, an adjustment, despite my age and despite my condition, right? Is it going to be totally cured? No, but there isn't anything else that helps it, right? So that's part of educating the patient.
Okay.
Hey Doc, I got a question. This kind of piggybacks on what I believe Macy asked earlier about deciding between ilium and sacrum. I know the chapters talks a lot about if it's a sacrum, there's going to be a lot of edema, and we know if it's an EX ilium, the edema would probably show up in a similar way as it would with the sacrum. So if you could kind of repeat how you decide between the two, specifically when you don't have x-ray to help you.
Okay, so if you don't have x-ray to help you, then you didn't, you know, it's going to be hard to get MDAD. So you really don't know if you have an anatomical short leg or long leg or however you want to say that, right? So you're going to have to do what Marcos did and do some measuring from the ASIS down to the medium malleolus. That's one. What's one measurement? What's the other one, Marcos?
I've been trying to do from the head of the femur all the way down to the lateral malleolus, or even the test where you just put the feet even together, and then you can see if one is like, from one view, is one leg sitting higher, so that's telling you like a tibia is longer, and then if you go from the edge, is one further out, telling you if the femur is longer. But
Okay.
yeah, it's hard. But I've been trying to do from the head of the femur to the lateral malleolus to just try and avoid getting anything else but the femur and tibia.
Yeah, it's not an exact thing. Another way to look at it too is if you look behind the patient and look at those PSISs and meaning the dimples, to see if you can see one leg shorter than the other standing. Then you know you can start thinking about, well, there might be an anatomical short leg, so that you don't get confused when you do a prone leg check. But the film really straightens out a lot of that issues. Just understanding then what a PIX does to the leg length, what an ASIN does to the leg length, and then seeing if it matches what you're seeing.
And if it's not matching what you're seeing, you're probably thinking sacrum then.
Then I'm thinking sacrum, yeah.
Got you. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah. Also, another thing too is think about the lateral visualization. If you see somebody with a hyperlordosis, don't think just, oh, that could be a PI or EX. That could be a sacral segment. Right? We kind of forget about that.
Doc, could the leg length being different than expected, did you also see that in lumbars? Could that, like a lumbar, cause a leg length differentiation than what you expected?
Especially with a muscle spasm, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we look at the leg length, but we don't live or die by it. Just like everything, right? We take everything with a grain of salt and try to put it together at the end.
So, Doc, have you ever had a time, I know it's called the SASIN, but has there ever been a time where it's a PI of 1 and then an IN, or a PI of 2 and an IN of like 8? and then we try and go for the sacrum. Because
I would only go for the sacrum if the leg looks shorter than expected.
Yeah, I was just saying if it like followed all the things for the SASIN, but instead it was like a PI of 2 and an IN of 8, where the IN's the major.
Yeah.
Or just an IN. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, just remember, sometimes you guys try to overthink stuff, and you come up with scenarios that never happen. Right? So, yeah. I mean, that's good thinking, right? But
Probably doesn't exist.
you may never see that. Yeah.
Okay. If there's any more questions, that would be all right. Steven said on page 64 in the case notes, it gives a way to measure leg length and determine anatomical short leg. So if anyone has page 64 of the case notes, you can also check that out. But your best bet, I'm sure, is the MD-80 on the film, for sure. But until then, while we're in school, we just got to kind of figure it out with what we got.
Dr. Meisel, did you ever take films of the actual like tibia and femur to determine leg length, or would you just stick to MD-80?
Yeah, I never had to convince myself to do anything other than what I was supposed to do. So, yeah. What would be the point of taking full leg? We don't really care what the length of the legs are. We just want to know what's happening at the femur head, right? And then what's happening at the base of the sacrum. Because that's our level foundation, right? So we could have a short right leg, let's say of 4 millimeters, but even if you figure in fixing the ilium and what that might do to the length of the leg, if the sacrum stays level, we're fine, right? We're not going to worry about it. It's when if we correct the ilium and then we really make an actual deficiency of, let's say, 9 or 12 millimeters on somebody after we would fix their ilium, and then we start thinking about, well, maybe a lift would be needed in that case, but then it's got to fit all the other rules, right? It's got to fit, it's got to be on the side of a convexity, on the side of the open wedge. And then another thing that we forget about too, and that is what's happening in the feet. Does a person also pronate? Well, that can create leg length inequality as well. So you got to take all that in consideration before you start worrying about putting lifts in people's shoes. Especially here in Florida, people don't wear shoes. Right, Paul? They wear sandals all the time. So it's pretty hard to put a heel lift in a sandal. And it doesn't make any sense to even try to do that with a patient unless they're willing to commit to doing it. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. I probably, in my 31 career, maybe put in a dozen heel lifts. That's not very many. Not very many.
Did you give orthotics often?
I did a lot of that, yeah, because I was trying to influence. I thought I could have the patient be more compliant with that than I would a heel lift, believe it or not. You wouldn't think so, but again, it's the sandals. The ladies, they need a special lift, or even orthotics because they like to wear high heels, and you got to try to talk them out of that. And sometimes it's a battle not worth fighting, right? They're just never going to change, right?
With the patients you did give orthotics to, did you observe better gait on them and less problems?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I had patients come in where they'd been to a lot of different healthcare people before me, other chiropractors, physical therapy, and you think, well, okay, let me think about something that maybe that they hadn't thought of. And on every new patient, I looked at their feet. In fact, I did a foot leveler scan on them. They had no idea why I was doing that, but it was for future reference to find out if anything in their feet might have something to do with their condition. And I had a lot of people come in with knee pain and hip pain, and I said, let's just experiment one time. And I would tape their arches, not even adjust them, possibly. Say, okay, I'm going to tape your arch, and I want you to go do something for the next 2 or 3 hours. I want you to go for a walk. I want you to go grocery shopping. And I say, but I can't. My hip just kills me when I do that. I say, well, maybe it won't today because I'm going to tape that pronated arch that you got. And so on your next visit, I want you to tell me if you felt any difference in your ability to walk and stand. And if it's their feet and you tape that arch, they're going to say, you know what? I really felt a difference. Well, okay, that tells you now that the arch is part of their problem. What's more foundational than the feet?
Right, nothing, yeah. Would you examine their feet, adjust them if needed, and then get orthotics ordered on that same day? If you could?
Yeah, if you can.
Oh, cool. Okay.
You might have to save that for, the second or third visit, but yeah, wherever you can fit it in. I would tell patients too, let's say that they were really acute. Well, you're not going to talk about orthotics when they're acute. You get them out of their acute pain. They say, okay, now long term, probably, Mr. Jones, I want to show you what's going on with your feet. Long term, that may be part of the problem. So, yeah, if I ever thought it was part of their complex of their problem, I already had that scan from the first visit, and I just show it to them. It takes about 30 seconds.
So, Doc, would you, if you're just visually looking at someone's feet and one side has a normal arch and then the other side has a collapsed arch, are you thinking that's more of a foot issue than a pelvis issue, or a little bit of both, or a knee issue? I mean, when you just see one side arch is collapsed, what are you thinking with that?
It could be some trauma.
Okay.
Something happened where they landed bad and dropped that navicular down.
Mm-hmm. And when, say you're adjusting the foot, do you think, and it starts to hold, would you still give them orthotics, or would you have to rescan them then and then see what their new?
Well, you can just experiment with it. Maybe some people you won't need to do orthotics. Others say, hey, if you just want this to hold and have me see you less, this might be worth the effort.
Okay, I was more towards if they came into your office with orthotics and then you realized that maybe it was a collapsed navicular, and then you adjusted that, and then say you adjusted maybe their knee. Would you say, okay, maybe it's a good time to get you scanned for new orthotics just because of how much you probably changed that?
Oh, yeah. I've had patients come in with orthotics from podiatrists that they'd had for 20 years. Those hard plastic things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you tell them to throw those away and let's give you some nice, soft, flexible. Let that arch move. It needs support, but it also needs to move. It needs to flex. You got that stiff plastic thing in there, and it's just, pounding.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Did I answer your question, Patrick? Did I answer?
You did.
Okay.
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much. I do have one really quick follow-up about the orthotics. When you did prescribe orthotics to your patients, how long-term were they wearing them? Was it kind of like a rest of your life type of deal, or did you tell them?
Well, I made them pay enough for them that when they got them, they were going to wear them. Right?
Sounds good. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah. So if you pay $400 for a pair of orthotics, chances are you're going to use them.
Yeah.
Right?
All right. Anyone else before we'll let Doc go? Well, thank you for this tonight, Doc.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. It always goes by.
You're welcome.
It always goes by super quick, but we hope we can get back together shortly.
It must have been good. I see John still smiling. He's not sleeping.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again, Doc. We appreciate it. And,
You bet. I'm pretty sure next week we'll still be off campus. So we'll meet again next week. If there's any particular things you want me to talk about, let me know through Marcos or through my Palmer email, and I'll try to make sure I fit it in. And maybe if I know in advance what you want to know about, maybe I can give you some better visual of what you're asking for. Maybe I can find in my treasure trove of PowerPoint something I can show you.
well, what's always great is for online is maybe we can have the dreaded MDAD discussion.
Well, we're actually doing that next week in Care 4. So I could do it again on Thursday night. It'll be fresh in my mind.
I don't know if we want to do that to you, but
No, that's fine. No, because actually, I would say in the Gonstead system, that's probably one of the hardest concepts to, number one, understand, and then number two, okay, now that I understand it, how am I going to use it? How am I going to use it now?
yeah.
So if you can get that down, you're ahead of a lot of field doctors, way ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Suh actually commented during our chapters challenge when we did it. He was discussing how you have to know what it does and what the adjustment will do, but at the same time, will that make the patient worse if you just adjust that leg length? Because sometimes it can make a situation a lot worse.
Yeah, we should not be in the business of balancing legs.
Yeah.
In the Gonstead system, get that out of your head. We're not going to balance the legs because 90% of our patients don't have equal leg length to begin with. I don't care what they tell you in care class. When you get in practice, believe me, that's what you're going to see.
All right, looks like some people have just said thank you, so I don't think there's any more questions. But thank you again, Dr. Meisel.
Okay, thank you guys. Thanks for all your support.
Thanks, Dr. Meisel.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for
See you
coming.
soon.
Yeah.